Tonight I'm going to be dissecting a slightly controversial topic, namely stickers on the fingerboard. Are they a good idea to start off with? Yes or no? If you have been watching my content all along, or even more recently, I think you can probably imagine what my answer is going to be. But for the avoidance of any doubt, the answer is no, no, and then a little bit more no. Now, I'm not going to go on a rant about stickers on the fingerboard, but I'm going to explain to you in detail why I think they are a really bad idea and what I do with my students instead. That works much, much, much better. If you ask me right now, Julia, can you pick up a pencil and draw a line on the fingerboard where the G is? I wouldn't have a clue. You know what? I might get somewhere within perhaps, a centimetre or so, but certainly no closer than that. However, if you ask me, Julia, can you play me a G? There it is. So, how come I can't visually pinpoint where the note is, but I know exactly where to go? Which, let's face it, if you're new to it, is a really, really weird concept, right? Well, because the way we find notes on the instrument is essentially a process of triangulation in a certain way. I always say to my students, it works a little bit like a sat-nav. And that means in order for any kind of navigation device to work, you need to enter the destination you want to get to first, and then it can take you there. On the cello, that means I need to have the note I want to play in my ear. I need to essentially, in the test, whether it's in your ear or otherwise, is really whether you can sing the note. If you can sing the note, you can play the note, because once you can sing it, it means you have pinpointed it in your ear. You know where that destination, that target note is. It might take you a few goes to consistently hit it, and it might mean lots of target practice, lots of adjusting back and forth, and it will certainly test your patience, but that is the process. So the moment you bring stickers into the equation, you are setting up a completely wrong pathway in the brain for how to find a note, because you're essentially saying, okay, I don't need to use the ear, I'm going to control it visually. And the one sense we don't really use for the act of playing the instrument itself is our vision. Ultimately, our vision is really mainly used for reading the music and seeing, communicating with our fellow players, seeing what is going on around us. It is not in any way needed to technically play the instrument. So bringing the vision into the process of pinpointing the location of a note sets up a completely wrong process, a completely wrong parameter in the brain. Quite apart from that, from a purely technical point, I can, whenever especially children come to me, even if there aren't any stickers on the fingerboard anymore, I can usually make a very well-informed guess as to whether they started with stickers or not. And of course, I always ask, and usually the answer is yes. Why? Because they come to me playing like that, with a really, really twisted back, with a sort of spinal twist, with the left shoulder going back, which of course comes from the fact that they spend their entire formative stage really looking to the left to find notes. So you're twisting the spine, you're twisting the neck, and you essentially get used to, especially obviously in first position, you can't possibly see the stickers without making that turn. So it's something that really, I don't understand the usage of it, because it's something that in the long run creates far more problems than it ever solves. Quite apart from that, even if you put a sticker onto the fingerboard, it can only give you a very approximate range, yeah? So even any note that I play, you can hear that E. Depending on how I slightly balance the weight on my finger, it can either be very flat, very sharp, but there will only be one point where it is actually in tune. So it can, at best, really, the sticker get you in the sort of vicinity of a note. And again, what that does, it almost from the beginning sets you up to play notes in a very approximate manner, which of course is then something, as you progress, you are going to have to gradually undo. And I think really learning and teaching and training should really be constructed in such a way that there is never a point at which you have to go back and relearn something. The truth is 99.9% of us have all been at that point somewhere in our development where something was, not really taken care of properly, not taught properly, and at the stage when you really want to start playing more advanced stuff, you have to go right back to the beginning. And for us, that process very, very often happens actually when we come to conservatoire, when we come to music college. I would say a great many players in their first year are completely taken back, stripped back to basics, because there are a lot of holes in the whole technique, in the whole system, and you've got to fix those before you can go on. So I really try to teach my students in such a way that the progress is linear. It's not a kind of backwards forwards. So how do we go about finding the notes? And for that, we first of all need to obviously understand a little bit how the instrument works, and especially how the instrument is tuned, right? So we're having our 4 strings, which are all tuned in ideally perfect fifth. So they are all exactly the same distance from one another. So we have got 4 notes straight away which we can use as reference points. On top of that, so we've got our A, we've got our D, G. On top of that, of course, each note, each open string has got a whole series of harmonics. So we've got right here at the halfway point of the string, you have got, so that's the open D, you've got another D, that's an octave higher, sounding an octave higher, you've got an A, upper fifth, you've got another D, you've got an F sharp, and more and more. And of course, on each, the same on each string, yeah? So you've got your G here, you see, A string. So you have got between those strings quite a lot of notes you can use for reference. And that is how we start. So the moment I introduce the left hand, the first thing we learn to play is a clean octave. So if you're not sure what an octave sounds like, you probably know what Somewhere Over the Rainbow sounds like. Well, that's the interval Somewhere Over the Rainbow starts on. And so on, right? So that's your first reference point, the clean octave. So what we do, we start by open string, let the note ring. Now, left hand comes in, and you see what I'm doing there. I'm humming, singing or humming the note. Yeah. So you need to program in your destination note. Like that, on all the different strings. And obviously you can sing that in whatever, you can sing that G in whatever octave is comfortable for you, that same with the C. So that's the first thing. You can see that everything I do here goes via the singing. Why? Because the singing, everything is, the whole left hand is really ultimately the puppet of the ear. Yeah, so you can imagine that, you know, there's sort of strings in here, and how high or how low it goes depends entirely on what the ear has decided where it needs to land. So when people have problems with tuning, that is not usually a technical problem. Of course, sometimes, you know, if the technique might not help, if the placement is bad, if the arm position is bad, whatever, you're gonna find it more difficult. But most tuning problems are not technical problems. They are problems of the ear not being trained well enough. So the ear, you have to imagine, is a little bit like a measuring instrument, like a gauge, yeah? And any kind of scales, gauges, whatever, need to be calibrated. If they're not calibrated, they're going to give you very, very, very funny readings, right? And that's the same with the ear. Intonation is not something which you learn once and you have it for the rest of your life. I'm afraid to say it's something that is daily donkey work. For any string player, any wind player, any brass player, it's something we have to work on to get it ever cleaner and to maintain it at that level really throughout our careers. But of course, it helps enormously if right from the start, from day one, you are taught to listen incredibly carefully and to pitch. Yeah, so that's the ultimate word here. We need to pitch, and pitching involves singing. Okay, now if you're going to say to me, I can't sing for toffee, but I still want to play the cello, what do we do? So even singing can be trained. And I've had students who find singing at pitch quite difficult. So we will first of all spend, while we're just working on the open strings, getting the right hand sorted really well, in parallel to that, we will, away from the cello, usually involving the piano or some other reference point, we will learn to sing, first of all, basic intervals. And I find it very often helps to, as I've done there with Somewhere Over the Rainbow, to relate it to a piece of music which is recognizable, which you know well. Yeah, so for instance, Christmas carols are very, very useful, that particularly for learning to pitch a fourth, because an awful lot of them seem to start on a fourth. So that is what we do instead. So the first thing is the octave. Then we introduce other intervals as we go along. For instance, the fifths is, if you want to think of Twinkle Twinkle, there you go. And so on, as I said, the fourth. Yeah, I know it's January, but that one works very well all year round for that. Yeah? So to sum it up, the path to learning to play in tune is absolutely never via visual control. It can only be learned sustainably, really, by learning from day one to be guided by our ear. And actually, as a matter of fact, in a great many countries, it is actually custom to start, especially children off, first of all, with something that is called solfège. So, which means you are learning to, first of all, accurately sing intervals and rhythms. And very often you have to do that for 1 or 2 years when you're very young. And once it's deemed that you have got a good sense of pulse, you've got a good sense of pitch, then you are let anywhere near an instrument. And I actually think there is a lot of sense in that. And for some reason, it's something that's not really common in the English-speaking world, but I greatly encourage that. So even if you are starting later in life, I would really encourage you, spend the time learning to sing intervals. And once you can do that, you will suddenly realize that when you're putting a note down and it's not entirely right, your hand will adjust. Yeah. So that is my explanation for why stickers on the fingerboard are a huge no-no for me. And I hope that those alternative strategies might be helpful to you. See you again soon.